Hello, this is Backyard Reads, and today I'll be reviewing the book of the Epic of Gilgamesh, this Norton Critical Edition. Oh, that's a cat. Translated and edited by Benjamin R. Foster. The Epic of Gilgamesh. It's one of the oldest sorts. It's one of the oldest mythologies recorded by the oldest known civilization, which is the. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the cat. It tells the epic of the 1/3, 2 parts mortal and 1 part divine. No, it's like 2/3 mortal and 1/3 divine, which is a very odd sort of combination, but I mean it actually is pretty interesting sort of way of doing it, because reinforces this strange sort of divinity, which is far more interesting than saying like, oh yeah, it's just half god, half human. But yeah, it's just a more interesting way of doing it. But yeah, it's a very old sort of story, as if anyone knows about it, and it's a very literal translation of the original tablets. It like begins with birth, or like the birth of the world, and it ends with his growth into a better king. Throughout the book, it's like his pursuit of immortality, the ultimate folly of seeking immortality. It's generally it's a tale as old as time, really. And the way it ends is that that he does achieve some sort of immortality, but not the kind he was initially looking for. It's the immortality of leaving a lasting legacy, of being a very good leader for his people, a very kindly man, a just man, and all that. Because it's a more literal translation, there's a lot of notes in the passages that kind of go on the well, is it this or is it that, or where you get a lot of people like interpreting some of the passages. In reality, because it's a more literal translation, it's kind of harder to tell of what they meant. There's like one bit of Enkidu and Gilgamesh embracing each other and kissing. Some could interpret it as a sort of a gay thing, which maybe yes, but maybe no, because one thing that has to be taken into account is that this is like thousands of years into the past, and so that kissing may have meant something very, very different as it does now. Like it may not have the sort of romantic connotations. That's hard to tell. We don't know what exactly the culture was like. We do know some things, but we don't know everything. We do know that it was from Mesopotamian, Gilgamesh, like Sumerian, Hittite, Akkadian. It's something that you need to read if you want to try and understand stories of the ancient world. Because a lot of people, when they think of like old stories of old epics, right, they usually think of something on the lines of Odyssey, Iliad, or the Poetic Edda. But even then, like, the Poetic Edda is not exactly as well known as the Iliad or the Odyssey. But it's definitely important, because it's definitely one of the earliest known of tales. And you can kind of get the idea what they valued a little bit. For the actual, now there's a lot of different versions. There's you could say the actual story, like the actual epic, is about 100 pages long. And then there's several other bits of it. There's like analogs to the epic. There's like various poems that are to Gilgamesh, and then there's a Hittite version of it. But to get all of it, that's where it's like about 170 pages long, right? And then the rest of the book or this version of the book anyway, is like the criticisms and response, or the interpretations rather of the tale. Like for instance, one of them is like the LGBTQ whatever sort of interpretation of like them kissing, right? And which is, again, it's an interpretation, and it could really mean anything. One thing about the Epic of Gilgamesh is its influence on so much things. One thing is that it certainly had an impact on Bible in a way, because there's a big reference to an antediluvian flood. Well, maybe not antediluvian, but there's like this flood, and there's these two people that survive it and they become immortal. And there's like this general impossible task of becoming immortal, achieving somewhat a lesser form, but then losing that immortality to a snake, or rather the rebirth of a snake, the shedding and all that. And one of the more well-known modern interpretations of Gilgamesh is the Gilgamesh that we find in the Fate series, I believe, known as the King of Heroes. I believe that's what he's referred to as. And in there, he's very arrogant. He's very blah blah blah. It's that version of Gilgamesh is him before meeting Enkidu, because when he meets Enkidu, he becomes like these really good friends, and he's like, oh yeah, let's have some really good fun, yeah. And then he changes a bit, like after his friend's death, and all these other things, trials and tribulations, and you can see that he's like a really changed man. It's an interesting sort of story that I think a lot of people would really. It's something that I think if you wanted to understand the old epics, like you couldn't do worse than beginning with the Epic of Gilgamesh, because one, it's very short. Two, it's with this version anyway, is that there's little bits of explanations to words that may be a bit kind of strange, like as you're reading it, like on the bottom of the page. Okay, like for instance, there you can't really see it, but it's like the Mesopotamians considered a small group of the gods great or superior above all others. The stillness of night was sometimes expressed as the time when even the great gods had retired for their rest. Yeah, it's this can be a very good way of trying to understand mythology and all that. And it, like, if you want to look up understand a little bit of I believe it's John Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, I do believe he references Gilgamesh as one of his things. Honestly, it's very apt because it's one of the oldest, but I would highly recommend you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, but only read the Epic of Gilgamesh if you want to understand like history and culture, and a little like a history of myth and the older epics and heroes and everything like that. And if you want to kind of understand a little bit of a cultural want of like a very, I would say, shrouded sort of civilization, I would definitely read it. Otherwise, it may be a little too short for someone to really justify paying for this. And to be honest, I did get this a few years ago, and for all I know is that this is completely out of print. Okay? So, I do recommend reading this if you want to learn. Maybe not exactly the Norton version, but definitely finding a as literal translation of it as possible will be your next best thing. But that is my review, and goodbye.